Welcome to Get Momentum for Life. I'm your host, Eric Pugliese, and today I'm super excited to have Jessica Turton. Hi, Jessica.
Hi, Eric. It's lovely to be here. Thanks for having me.
Likewise. Look, super excited to have you. Jessica is an accredited dietitian and nutritionist. She's the founder of Ellipse Health, where she works in conjunction with other dietitians, and they do virtual sessions as well as face-to-face. They're running a clinic in Castle Hill at the moment. So Jess, tell me a little bit about yourself. Tell me about your journey. How did you get involved in nutritional therapies?
Okay, no problem. Well, I guess I was interested in nutrition from a very young age. I remember even in primary school, wanting to have a healthy lunch and all that sort of stuff. But I guess as I grew older, my idea of health and nutrition changed a lot, and it still changes to this day, which is a good thing, I think. But really, from a personal perspective, where it all started for me was back in high school. I was noticeably larger than all of my friends. I was the tallest in the year, taller than all the boys, and I just felt like a big person.
Mm-hmm.
And I was carrying an extra bit of weight, so I jumped onto Google. I was looking at government websites. I just wanted to know how I could eat a little bit healthier and lose some weight.
Yeah.
And I went down this sort of path of just eating less, moving more, restricting my calories, and I was losing weight, so I was looking at what I needed to be doing. I was doing it and I was seeing results. And people were congratulating me and sort of joining in as well and wanting to do what I was doing. And it all started, really well-intentioned and healthy-minded. But somewhere along the way, things sort of turned a little bit sour.
Okay.
And I was someone that had a lot of passions. I was really driven at school and I had a lot of friends. But as I was doing this sort of diet, things were getting more and more restrictive. And I noticed that I was sort of losing myself along the way. And my focus became very much on weight loss and calories.
I see. And so your relationship with food dropped and you had this toxic relationship with food from then on.
Yeah, over the course of about 6 months to a year, it sort of turned from I just want to eat healthy and lose a bit of weight to, I want to be super, super skinny, lose as much weight as I possibly can. And I hate food. I hate everything, I was very negative.
Wow.
And it was very, very sort of toxic, and it ruined a lot of my relationships. And within myself, I just didn't know how to eat anymore. I didn't know what a good relationship with food was, because I thought, I was doing all the right things. I was following trusted websites, government advice. I even went to dietitians and doctors and asked for their support and didn't really get any good guidance at all. And I basically got to a rock bottom point where I was like, I can't lose any more weight, everyone around me was scared of me. They didn't know how to talk to me. I was losing interest in school and things like that. And I realized I had to turn it around, and I knew I wanted to be a dietitian. I wanted to be a dietitian from a very young age. And so I was like, you know what? If I'm going to be a dietitian and help other people, I need to figure out how to help myself.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
So in total, I had lost about 30 kilograms during that time. And I was, I was quite underweight. And I was like, okay, I'm going to figure out how to eat healthily and how to eat normally and how to get my life back and things like that.
So this happened prior to you becoming a dietitian?
Yes.
Wow. Okay. And so it brought on curiosity into wanting to help yourself and then help other people. That's impressive.
Yeah. And I think it really fueled my passion to want to be a dietitian. There was a part of me that was really frustrated as to how this advice had really impacted me in such a negative way. But then there was a part of me that was like, far out, if this happened to me, then it must be so easily happening to all these other people as well. And I want to figure out how to improve my own health, but, I've always been someone that's wanted to help others too. And people in my family didn't have a very good relationship with food. I didn't have, a good system to model off. So I wanted to help my family. I wanted to help my friends. They were all falling down the same path as me. So it was a very toxic environment I was in. But I knew I wanted to find a way out. And so that kind of led me down, this path of trying to figure out, what the ideal diet is, but also in the context of making sure that I could nurture my relationship with food and really experience food freedom.
And so many of us and so many of our patients, probably this story resonates to them because the advice continues to be restrictive. And so you found a good solution to improving your toxic relationship with food and meeting your health outcomes, which is difficult to achieve. And you've developed this strong interest in insulin hypersensitivity and impaired sugar metabolism. So tell us, your passion led you onto the low carbohydrate template. So tell us about this.
Yeah. So what happened after I kind of hit rock bottom was okay, I need to gain weight and start eating again. But I didn't know what foods to eat because all my focus was on calories. So all foods had just become calories to me. I didn't really understand what I needed and what I didn't need, etc. So I just started eating again, I suppose, and increasing my portions. And this actually led to more of a binge eating problem where I had no satiety reflex or gauge of when I was full. I just had no idea. And so I would just eat. And then I would get hungry again within hours and I'd be eating more. And because I didn't know what to eat, it was a very frantic, I'll just eat whatever's in front of me. And I actually worked at a cake shop as well.
How difficult could that be? Wow.
So I was eating all the cakes and it was just, I gained weight so rapidly. All of that weight that I lost, I gained it back plus more. And my relationship with food was at its worst, but everybody thought I was healthy because they thought, oh, she's gained the weight back, so she's normal again, she's fine, she doesn't need support, So then this sort of took me all the way through to when I started uni. So I was sitting in my first year of lectures at uni and I was actually overweight, studying to be a dietitian. I had the worst relationship with food. I'd experienced, the severe restriction and now the excess and not being able to switch it off. And at university, I learned about the role of insulin in fuel utilization. And it was a very simple concept, the way it was explained to me. And as soon as I heard the words fat burning, my ears pricked up. And I learned that, when insulin levels were low, your body was able to burn more fat. And when insulin levels were high, your body was burning glucose and your ability to burn fat was sort of switched off. And that's all I needed to hear. And I'd never heard that before, this kind of hormonal model of fuel utilization and fat burning. I'd never come across that before. And so it kind of led me down a path because by this point I was at uni, so I knew how to actually look at the literature rather than just going to random Google websites. I kind of knew what I was doing now. And so I was able to start looking at how you can actually lower insulin levels and how that related to blood sugar and things like that. And that's when it kind of opened my eyes to this idea of a low carbohydrate diet and the importance of blood glucose stability. Because I think at that time when I was dealing with binge eating, I was getting these massive sugar highs and these intense drops.
Exactly.
Yes. And the way that messes with your mental health and your relationship with food is just
incredible.
Insane.
Because not only is it a dopamine rise, and for those that don't understand that cycle of pleasure that's dopamine driven, so and that's primitive brain, and then a metabolic imbalance which is insulin driven. So then you've got the double whammy of wanting food and primitively wanting food and also craving food because of the insulin. So that was groundbreaking for you, obviously.
Definitely, definitely. And I started implementing the sort of lower carb approach in my in my life, sorry, because it was the first thing that actually made sense to me. The eat less, move more, it made sense on a very basic level. And when I was losing weight and, developing this toxic relationship with food, I actually didn't care about my health at all. It was all just about weight loss. But when I started wanting to actually eat normally again and improve my relationship with food and improve my health because I had destroyed my health so much, there were no answers as to how to do this. And there were no obvious answers as to how your body actually works and what it actually needs. So when I learned about the low carb diet and started digging into that, everything just started making sense, and like what my body needed and the way my body was going to function best and how that related to food was all kind of coming together.
I went through a similar phase, similar a bit later in life. And so lots of my patients that end up going on a low carbohydrate diet, they will find that it will be super difficult for the first 4 to 6 weeks. Did you end up finding that difficulty as well, of withdrawals and toughness?
Look, I don't think it was difficult because the way that I did it was very
inclusive.
Well, yes, inclusive and unique. I was very strict with like the low carb aspect. So I was like, I'm going to do this properly. I'm going to get rid of all those high density carbohydrate foods, and I'm going to count my carbohydrates, and I'm going to keep them really, really low. And all that was very easy for me because I had the tools of how to do it. But one thing I did do that I know a lot of people don't do is I ate a very, very high calorie, low carbohydrate diet. And when I'm talking high calorie, I'm talking 4,000 to 6,000 calories a day, which is probably double or triple
what someone would
what
consume.
Most people
Yeah.
Yeah. And the reason I did that was because the urge to binge eat was so, so overwhelming for me. If I didn't push myself beyond the point of satiety, then I would just binge. So this is why I loved the idea of the low carb approach, because there was this strong message that you could eat proteins and fats to satiety. And my satiety was all mucked up. So my satiety was all the way up here. I had to eat a lot to reach satiety, but I still got to reach it. And it was a feeling I hadn't felt for so long. And so even though I was still eating so many calories, I was actually losing weight because I wasn't binge eating anymore. My relationship with food was getting so much better from the day I started the diet. It started getting better, but it was getting progressively better with time.
And you were smart by picking that high density calorie food coming from fat and from the right carbohydrate as well, which usually has a better satiety to simple sugars. That was a smart move.
Exactly right. Exactly right. So a lot of people would be so shocked at the way I did it. A lot of people would be like, oh my God, that's far too many calories and it's far too much fat. But the reality is when you're binge eating, you're eating tens of thousands of calories in a sitting, and it's so debilitating and it's so mentally excruciating that, even if you were to eat too much calories, but it was the right types of foods, it was such a relief to not actually have that desire to binge.
Wow. That definitely was a groundbreaker. And so thank you for sharing, by the way, because so many medical professionals, including dietitians, go through disordered eating. There's a big percentage of us. And it's the ones that have dealt with them that are passionate about this, and they're trying to help other people. So on that subject, people have this tendency of not wanting to see dietitians and nutritionists. And so more and more I'm seeing this. So people think that they know it all. They're usually misinformed. There's too much in social media. What is the benefit of seeing a dietitian?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yes, that is so true. You can pretty much Google anything and find an answer and find a meal plan, find a food list. You can pretty much get the how. You know, you can get the how on Google, like how to do whatever diet you want. It's all available freely online. But I also find it's equally very overwhelming. So not only is it overwhelming, but you don't know what advice is actually right for you. It's just like when I Googled how to lose weight when I was back in high school, and I got advice that was so inconsistent with my health, my mental health, my physical health, and it led me down this 10-year, journey to disordered eating, and that could have been avoided if I had gone to a skilled dietitian who could help guide me from the very beginning. But the thing is, every dietitian works differently, so I can't really speak for all dietitians. But in our practice, we use a method called medical nutrition therapy. And with medical nutrition therapy, what we do is we take a very, very comprehensive assessment of the patient. We find out, their medical history, their medications, their supplements, their dieting history. We look at their blood tests. We take note of their signs and symptoms. We look at their dietary intake, of course, and their physical activity. And then we basically work out what their top nutrition-related priorities are. So these are like priorities related to essential vitamins, essential minerals, macronutrients, energy. What do we know this person needs? And what's the priority? So we actually list them in order of priority. And then based on that, we come up with a dietary plan that is essentially targeted to those priorities. And we develop that in conjunction with the patient.
Yeah. Okay, fantastic. So you're individualizing them, and you're really tailoring a program to the person, and probably not missing macronutritional deficiencies, which is a big issue lately as well with all that restrictive eating that's happening.
Yes. So part of the reason that I believe I had developed an eating disorder from reducing calories is I became very deficient in lots of micronutrients that we know are really vital for the brain and for your cognitive health. And so that would have accelerated this kind of like disordered eating behaviors that were happening to me. And this happens to lots of patients. So when you Google something, whether it's low carb, vegetarian, vegan, low fat, you mainly get kind of like the overview of what you need to do, but you don't actually get any specifics in terms of how to meet your individual micronutrient requirements and energy requirements on that dietary approach. So we're happy to help people kind of, if they come in with specific preferences, like they say, I really want to do low carb, or I really want to be vegan, or I really want to do paleo, we're happy to kind of work within that template if it's suitable for them, but we need to develop it in such a way that's going to meet their energy and nutrients.
And that's the crucial strategy that the patient needs. So they need that informed, guided decision. Joint decision tends to be usually on whatever they feel they need is the right option for them. So I find a lot of value in a dietitian assessing and also suggesting treatment options, which is amazing. You're doing that. I think that's where weight management therapy should be heading towards, that joint help with medical help, dietetics, and probably even exercise physiology to tailor again the exercise.
Yeah. Because look, the other thing with weight loss specifically is that, you can jump onto Google, download a diet plan, and you might lose 20 kilos because you're following it so strictly. But then there's no guidance on what to do after the diet is over. So you get to a point where it's like this really restrictive diet, you just can't keep doing it anymore, or maybe you've reached your weight loss goals, and then it's like, now what? If you just kind of transition back to what you were eating before, or you don't have a plan in place, you're probably going to gain all the weight back and potentially more, which again is what happened to me. And then that can impact your relationship with food and your body and kind of make you feel a bit disillusioned about diet.
And from that moment on, from the assessment, and how do you structure the follow-ups? How often does the patient need to be seeing you? What do the patients bring over to you? Do you have an app that they come in and they keep food diaries? So tell us, how does that work?
Well, everyone's different in terms of what they need. And again, we kind of collaborate with the patient to find out what level of like intervention they want, because you have some patients that really want that structure and they want to catch up regularly, maybe every fortnight, especially at the beginning, because they have lots of questions. And, you know, sitting in a consult and hearing about something is one thing, but then going off and doing it in the real world and, you know, having friends and family chat to you about it, that's another thing. And we really want our patients to feel confident and understand what they're doing, but why they're doing it. And so frequent follow-ups really do help with that. But then as the patient starts to notice benefit and they start to be like more confident with what they're doing and they start to really understand it and they've received those tools and they know how to implement them, then you just space the consults right out and it becomes more like a troubleshooting thing. So you might space them out to once every 3 months. And it might just be a check-in. You know, the patient might be going extremely well and you might not need to make any changes, but we still do our dietary assessment to make sure they're meeting vitamins and minerals. And if they are, then we say, great, you're doing really well. You don't need to make any changes unless, of course, they want to. But then you'll have patients that hit a plateau or they've got an event coming up or they want to, you know, they have a different goal now or something like that. And then for those patients, you will make changes based on the new information they give you. So I think frequent follow-ups at the beginning, but definitely spacing them out. And then when that patient feels that they're really in control, we like to make sure we've given them the tools and the resources and knowledge so that eventually they can just go off and live their life and they know how to adapt their diet according to their different stages.
And I've heard you talk about food freedom, which ultimately it's the goal that most people want to achieve. And that is something that people can achieve. So with your flexibility, you're going towards intuitive eating. Again, there's a misconception of intuitive eating, but it's aiming towards people. Someone has learned enough to know what is healthy and how to eat, which is food freedom, right? That's one of your mottos. So you work towards food freedom.
Yeah, understanding how different foods make you feel and why, and you know what foods are healthy for that individual. And just having that sense of awareness, you know, awareness about your body, awareness about how food makes you feel, but also awareness about what foods your body needs as well. I actually did a post recently about food freedom because, you know, there is that sort of camp of people in the disordered eating world that think food freedom is about eating everything in moderation. So letting yourself eat cupcakes when they're presented to you, letting yourself, you know, like eat pizza, you know, if you feel like it and things like that. But then the caveat of that is that those are ultra processed foods that may actually make you physically or physiologically unwell. And so we really need people to understand that, because you might be trying to let go of all restrictions and eating pizza every night, but that might be degrading your mental health and your physical well-being, and you might end up developing type 2 diabetes. And then the question is, well, is that really food freedom? Because I think for a lot of people, it's not. And we need to really redefine food freedom to not be about, you know, eating everything in moderation, but understanding more about how different foods make you feel.
And also matching your intake to having a healthy lifestyle and a healthy interior as well. So yeah, I agree with that. And then the other thing is it sustainable? So the way we're trying to make people eat, so that healthy, low carbohydrate approach, do you think it is sustainable? Lots of patients have this fear of, okay, I'm going to do this, but they're looking at it with a dieter perspective of dieting, and they're thinking that they're going to be able to do it for a short term, and then it's kind of come back with a vengeance. They will have to go back on highly processed food. In your experience, from what you've seen, again, you're proof that things that can be done. But in your patients, how easy is it?
Yeah, I do think, like with any diet, people can really just adapt it in the short term and implement it in the short term and make it work. But then over the long term, it does get more difficult because different situations will arise, whether it's like Christmas or birthdays or, different family members or different living environment or different work environment. And they all bring in new challenges. But in terms of like the low carb diet itself, I think about it as a therapeutic diet. So a low carbohydrate diet, and particularly very low carbohydrate diets, I think of them as a therapeutic diet that's reaching a therapeutic goal. And once we've reached that goal, whether it be weight loss or blood sugar improvement or metabolic health improvement, reversal of fatty liver, whatever it is, then we can actually have a conversation with the patient and say, are you enjoying what you're doing? Do you want to keep going at this level, or do you want to introduce some flexibility? And a lot of patients love it and they want to just keep going with it because they found such food freedom with that approach. And if that's the case, that's fine. You don't need to change anything. But there'll be another subset of patients that are like, oh, I really just want to have potato like once a week. Yeah. Can I do this? And then we say, well, let's try it and let's test it. So we'll make a few adjustments. We might have potato once a week. We'll talk about, portion sizes, what to have with the potato to minimize the glucose response, etc. And then we'll do it for like 2-3 months. And then we'll catch up again to see how
sustainable
things
it is. Exactly. So it's trial and error, really. Unless they do have a true food addiction and potato is a trigger, then maybe not, but they'll figure it out. And they know that then that is a trigger and they probably won't go on it.
Well, that's right. Because if you say to someone, you just absolutely can never have potato again, they're going to be forever thinking that this potato is like the best thing in the world and their life sucks because they can't have potato. But if you say, no, bring it back in, but let's talk about what's reasonable. You might say once a week, twice a week, whatever. And then they do it, as you just said, if they bring that back in and then they're like, you know what, I was so hungry after I ate that potato, I didn't feel that sense of food freedom anymore, or my gut was in pain, then they know instantly that that's not right for them in this moment, and maybe they'll try again later.
Can it be done in type 1 diabetics, which I know it's your thesis, so you're doing a PhD on low carbs in type 1 diabetics. I've seen it in a couple of patients. There's a lot of fear, including an endocrinologist, on doing this. Yes,
there's a lot of fear because of the original treatment for type 1 diabetes, which was you'd go to hospital, you'd get put on a fixed insulin regime, so you'd get a certain dose of insulin at every meal, and then you would have to eat a certain amount of carbohydrates to match the insulin to prevent hypoglycemia. So that developed into this idea that you had to eat a certain amount of carbohydrates as someone with type 1 diabetes. But now that we have flexible insulin regimes and people learn how to count their carbohydrates, they actually don't have to eat a set amount of carbohydrate at each meal. They just have to know how to titrate their insulin according to their carbohydrate. Yeah. And even to this day, that's like mind-blowing for a lot of people with type 1 because they were educated a certain way and they've never been updated since. So we did a clinical trial with 20 adults and we put them on a very low carbohydrate diet starting at 50 grams a day. And it took a lot of education for the patients to actually, let them know this was safe and their body didn't need all those carbohydrates, but it was very important that they reduced insulin accordingly. Otherwise, they would run into trouble. And then for those patients to also learn that their body could very effectively use fat as an energy source, because that was a big question, like, where am I going to get my energy from? Well, your body can use fat as an energy source. And the really cool thing about fat is fat doesn't need insulin to be metabolized. So these people who have been like chained to carbohydrates for their whole lives or since they've been diagnosed get this information that their body can actually use fat for energy and they can eat lots of fat without having to inject all this insulin. It was very freeing for a lot of our participants to have that information. And we just finished the clinical trial and we had some really positive results. We saw improvements in glycemic control with less use of insulin and improvements in quality of life. And there were lots of other outcomes we measured, but it certainly appears that, it is an effective strategy. But the problem is, and you highlighted it just before, is most healthcare professionals are not on board.
There's this lack of education around it. And I think once a patient understands the dogma that you need carbohydrates, otherwise you're going to get a hypo, and they can get their sugars from fat and protein, but fat mainly, then, again, groundbreaking. As long as some endocrinologists are pro this, but there's still a big fear because we need studies like yours. So thank you for doing that. And then finally, my last question was, there's this huge market on low-carb substitutes. What's your take on this?
Yeah. So I think they're really useful, especially at the beginning. So I think for a lot of people, just the idea of not having bread or not having cookies or not being able to bake with their children, or, not being able to have certain foods that they're used to, whether it's a cultural thing or an emotional thing, that can be a big barrier for people. And a lot of people won't even try a low-carb diet based on that. And so to get those people on board, if it's something that you think is really going to benefit them and you want them to just give it a go, then you can introduce this idea of sort of low-carb swaps, where they might just swap out the high-carb bread for the low-carb bread, but still have a sandwich. And they might swap out the pizza for a lower carb pizza base, but still have the pizza. And then they might swap out their ice cream for a sugar-free ice cream. And so you just kind of make these little adjustments without actually really changing the food that they're eating. It's still the same thing. And a lot of people find that super easy. And then they start to notice, oh, my blood sugars are a little bit better, or I'm starting to lose a little bit of weight, or I feel a little bit more full, or my mental clarity is a little bit better. And then they're kind of more interested and they start asking more questions and they're like, this is really cool. I feel amazing. And then you start transitioning them more towards, I guess, a minimally processed diet. And the reason we would do that is because that's where more of the nutrients are. And especially for people with food addiction, for example, even those low carb alternatives might sort of lead to those addictive tendencies where they find it very difficult to stop. So it could still be better than the high carb version, but they might still not be meeting that kind of food freedom with the low carb alternatives. So to really help, progress forward, if they need it, we kind of switch over to more whole foods.
That's true. That's so true. Now you've got an ebook for those of my patients interested in your advice. And you also work out of Castle Hill, and you run a virtual clinic via Zoom. So thank you. It's been such a nice interview. Thank you for joining me. I love your approach.
Thank you for having me. I love your approach too. I mean, it was great to connect with you. When I looked through your Instagram, I was very relieved to find a doctor, a fellow healthcare professional who has similar values, because even though I think more and more healthcare professionals are aware of what we've been speaking about, I think there are still very few in total that practice these kind of methods. So it's lovely to connect with you.
Thank you. And we'll talk soon.